Mewtwo, a man-made Pokemon stronger than anything found in nature. A Pokemon that goes beyond legendary, but ever since its reveal to the West, we were lied to about its lore. It was never a murderous Pokemon prepared to wipe out everything that wasn't a clone. It was a Pokemon trying to find its place in the world. It has returned time and time again throughout the world of Pokemon with Mecha Mewtwo, a shadow form, and has even obtained the power of Mega Evolution all on its own. But what is the point of Mewtwo? What's its full story, and what is the meaning of Mewtwo's existence? All these questions will be answered and more as I share with you the tragically misunderstood life of Mewtwo. Howdy there, I'm Acrylic, and we're gonna jump right in with talking about, well, Mewtwo. All of its stories, all of its forms, everything. And we'll sprinkle in Mew as well, of course. This is effectively what I am going to begin as the Legendary Origins series, where I intend to cover every legendary and mythical Pokemon in their own videos. Beginning with the birth of Mewtwo, or at least the creation of it, because at least in the very beginning of Pokemon, we can walk our way into the burned mansion on Cinnabar Island, a place that suffered a great fire that caused ash and infestations of Pokemon to plague the location. Allow me to set the stage by describing the burned mansion first, and our lead-in through the front doors. Inside of this place, the place has become so unbearably toxic that people might enter, but only a handful of Pokemon are actually commonly found here. Rattata and Raticate plague the building just as any other rodent might, as they find safety inside of it. They gnaw on the structures, scavenge, and leave their scat all over the place. They're really bad at cleaning up. And this scat and filth, alongside the general pollution, then brings about two other lines of Pokemon, the Coughing line and the Grimer line. These Pokemon being born from filth like refuse in the case of Grimer, and smog or smoke in the case of Coughing. And as these Pokemon continue to live, they only continue to pollute the building more and more, making it a more ideal place for them to live as they push out any other kind of creature. The real outliers here are our Fire-type Pokemon, Vulpix, Growlithe, Ponyta, and Magmar. The first two are actually here because they likely followed the Rattata inside the building as they were looking for a fresh meal to eat. Meanwhile, Ponyta and Magmar are commonly found around volcanoes or mountainous lands, their preferred habitat. Though you could say that Growlithe also preferred mountainous habitats back in the days of history, so there might have been some incidental coincidences here. And if you want more in-depth breakdown of the regional ecology and this location, I have a whole series on that from Council to Kalos, with Galar coming up on the horizon. Though as we travel through this mansion, we will eventually find journals, burned and tanned with age. And I will actually be reading both versions of the journals because they tell us how the story of Mew and Mewtwo have changed over the years. Diary, July 5th, Guyana, South America. A new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle. This was changed to just say a new Pokemon was discovered deep in the jungle, without talking about South America at all. Diary, July 10th. We christened the newly discovered Pokemon Mew. Funny enough, christened is the word consistently used in old and new versions, which would then imply that, technically, I guess, Jesus is canonical, or at least whatever their version of Christ might be in the Pokemon world. I've claimed that it would technically be Suicune, or maybe some other Pokemon, but that's a different story for a different day. Instead, I want to focus on Mew, the ancestor of quote-unquote all Pokemon, which we know for a fact that Mew is not the literal ancestor of all Pokemon, thanks to Pokemon like Castform, Porygon, or Silvally existing. In addition, it isn't the ancestor of Pokemon not born of the planet, meaning it isn't going to be the ancestor of god Pokemon such as Arceus, the Trio of Myth, or the Lake Guardians. Mew is just the farthest back ancestor that we are aware of within the world of Pokemon. And what's cool about it is that while Mew was removed from Guyana, South America, as per lore, it still lives deep in the jungle. And they even show this to still be true within an ancient ruin in the Lentil region, amongst a couple of other examples that we'll talk about later. But here in the Lentil region, it just kind of flits around, playing and shielding itself, wanting you to play along with it, being very pure of heart and childlike almost, as you throw apples to break its shield, and you know what your reward is? If you're me, you get jump scared and completely cause yourself to miss the shot by just yeeting an apple at its face. But continuing through the journals, this next one is the greatest difference, I would argue. Diary, February 6th. Mew gave birth. We named the newborn Mewtwo. And then the new version instead states, Diary, February 6th. We obtained a new Pokemon from Mew. We have named this new Pokemon Mewtwo. But there is yet one other version on how Mewtwo was created, and it was told to us in the first movie, as through the found eyelash of Mew did they extract DNA to create Mewtwo, which, sure, if the hair follicle is still attached, then you can get DNA from it, but it's a pretty wild thing to find. You can't even see the eyelashes on that thing. But imagine just being the people who found the eyelash in the field, how tiny that is, and how much they must have originally thought they were crazy for actually finding it. Well, now that I think about it further, realistically, the field researchers probably just scooped up a bunch of rubble and dirt in the areas where they think they saw Mew, sifted it out, and then waited for the eyelash to float on top. So, I mean, I guess that's a possibility, but these are vastly different things. I mean, all these different ideas on how Mew created Mewtwo, or how Mewtwo was created right away in the beginning, already telling us that things are way different throughout all the years. I mean, I will at least admit, it's really hard to imagine Mew, the tiny gerboa that it is, giving literal birth, but I suppose it isn't impossible. I'd like to believe that they're being superficial with saying Mew gave birth, especially as we still have the cloning chambers in the basement of the burned mansion. Now, in the original games, we wouldn't even get the chamber that Mewtwo was born in, but do you know what else we don't get? Any hint whatsoever that Team Rocket even made Mewtwo. Yes, it might be hard to believe, but there is nothing in the original games that shows anything about Team Rocket being involved with the creation of Mewtwo. Actually, I don't think that's anything that's shown throughout any of the games whatsoever. That connection is only drawn in just about every other telling of the story that we know of, whether it be in the Pokemon Adventures manga, the first Pokemon movie, or the anime. So right away from the very beginning, things again are already a little bit muddy for Mewtwo. And to make this even funnier, Mew literally wasn't supposed to be in the game whatsoever, at least not the original games. And the only reason it was put in the game was because during the development of the game, they actually had a bit of space left from getting rid of unnecessary assets and optimizing things. So Mew was literally just thrown in as a joke, the 151st Pokemon, which could have been a later number. And to actually explain all that better, again, I'm not saying Mew wasn't supposed to exist. The infamous 151st Pokemon was never supposed to be included in the first Pokemon games. From Morimoto, it is actually stated, we put Mew in right at the very end. The cartridge was really full and there wasn't room for much more. It was only because the debug features weren't included in the final version of the game that Mew could fit in. So who knows, maybe Mew could have been held as a much longer mystery behind the scenes of Pokemon and changed the story of Pokemon longer term. And in fact, we do have a little bit more of a story for Mew, especially as we get to see that Mew is said to also live on Faraway Island. In the Japanese version of Pokemon Emerald, the message left on a signpost there contains a remnant of a signature belonging to a name ending in G. The researcher who wrote these diary entries is speculated to be Mr.Fuji, who is known as Dr. Fuji, back when he lived in Cinnabar Island and founded the Cinnabar Lab. Yes, this would be the same Fuji that we find in Lavender Town, a gentle old man that cares immensely for Pokemon. And apparently, according to Smash Bros. For Nintendo 3DS and the Wii U, they state that Fuji was the one to discover Mew, which is wild to consider until we get some more proof of this later. In fact, there are only two other individuals that have ever been said to have first discovered Mew, and one of them is the mother of Jessie of Team Rocket, whose name is Miyamoto. And I know, we're getting really deep in the weeds on Mew, but we'll loop back around to Mewtwo soon enough, just trust me on this. Because at least through this 5-day radio drama series known as The Birth of Mewtwo, which led up to the release of the first Pokemon movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, that we get some additional story that originally the West missed out on. We'll talk about 2 of the 5 parts now, saving the other 3 to break your heart later. Bulbapedia nicely gives us the synopsis as follows. The mythical Mew. In the distant past, the Earth was born. Now, the planet is populated by humans and mysterious creatures known as pocket monsters or Pokemon. As time passes, new species of Pokemon are discovered one after another, and they now number more than 100 species. Giovanni, the boss of the evil organization Team Rocket, tells a story that begins with an audio tape of the cry of the mythical Pokemon Mew recorded on it. 18 years. since the last contact with the Mew search team headed by the female Team Rocket grunt Miyamoto, a fossilized Mew eyelash is found at an excavation site. Oh, that's another version right there. Not just an eyelash, but a fossilized eyelash, which isn't impossible, but, you know, pretty freaking rare. And to follow this with some extra details, Miyamoto did not serve Giovanni. She actually served Madame Boss, the mother to Giovanni and the original said creator of Team Rocket. And just in short, Madame Boss was even worse than her son, wanting to sell Mew's Cry on CDs to people, believing that every single Pokemon should be used for profit. And I mean, even Giovanni at least deeply understood and loved his own Pokemon, if not at least his Persian. And I also suppose that depends on which version of Giovanni we're talking about, but let's move on. Giovanni brings this eyelash fossil to Dr. Fuji in the future, a scientist who is studying Pokemon DNA on New Island, and suggests that he tries creating a copy of Mew. He says to Giovanni that he doesn't know if it will work the same way as creating a copy of a human, but Giovanni sneers at him. The truth is that Dr. Fuji studied DNA in order to create and live with Amber 2, a copy of his daughter, Amber, who died young in an accident. And yeah, we're getting real deep into this. Pokemon has defied the laws of nature since even before Mewtwo existed. We're talking full-on bring your mother back, Full Metal Alchemist level stuff. Though, we'll get to the rest of this story in a moment because we have one more journal entry to get through within the Burned Mansion. Diary, September 1st. Mewtwo is far too powerful. We have failed to curb its vicious tendencies. Though, this entry, when translated from Japanese directly, gives us a little bit more emotion, saying, "The Pokemon Mewtwo is far too powerful. It's no use. I cannot control it!" From there, the story hits the same as it does in every story. Mewtwo blows up the lab in which he was created, but little do we originally know, Mewtwo wasn't just some vicious creature born to be destructive. Even though it was literally created to be a weapon of Team Rocket, it had a much more tragic story that was originally left out before being reattached to the greater overall story, and it does involve Amber 2. Alongside Mewtwo were clones of Amber and the Kanto starters, making them Amber 2, Bulbasaur 2, Squirtle 2, and Charmander 2, which all in all is pretty goofy, but they're scientists that managed to clone life back into existence, and even if it's only momentary, I can't really do that, so I'm technically not allowed to make fun of their lack of creativity. The complete synopsis of this story is stated as the following. The scientists observe the immature Mewtwo floating in its tank, and lament that despite its strong vital signs, it has not gained consciousness, much like the other clones. However, Mewtwo can hear their voices, though he does not understand what they are saying. Through the use of telepathy, the clone of Amber, Amber 2 again, tells Mewtwo that they are speaking. Mewtwo is startled and wonders what Amber 2 is, and she replies that she is a girl, a person. She tells Mewtwo that she was not aware that Pokemon could communicate like humans, to which Mewtwo ponders if he himself is a Pokemon or a human. However, Amber 2 says it should never matter which one it is. This singular interaction is the key to everything that Mewtwo will become, a memory that will, unfortunately, be forced out of his own head, and he will have to relearn. The scientific team studies the clone's brainwave patterns over time and figure out that they are speaking to each other through the usage of said telepathy. Fuji, however, is indifferent to the announcement, as he is only concerned with the clone of his daughter. And of course he would be. It's the whole purpose of his research. This is the reason he's doing anything, just so he can thwart death and break the cycle as he brings his daughter back. And all he needed was the funding to do so. This is also, of course, assuming that Fuji didn't have the funding in the past at all, and is only capable of doing this because he has Giovanni fully funding the project, allowing him to actually attempt to fully clone his daughter. And nearly every single time I talk about avoiding death or breaking this life cycle by bringing someone back even though they're well gone, I almost always bring up Full Metal Alchemist. I'm a weeb, of course, so what do you expect? But it gives us an amazing example through two brothers desperately wanting to bring their mother back to life. And in trying to do so, Alphonse Eric loses his body to bring back hardly even a shell of what their mother was. And the only way to bring Al back, even partially, was for Edward to sacrifice parts of his own body. These two break the cycle, break the rules of life itself, and through seeing the truth, they have newfound abilities, though parts of them are still lost. And this is a concept we see over many different series and all over Pokemon, that when we break the rules of nature, there's a sacrifice, a breaking point. Something is lost and will never return, and soon we're about to see where everything falls apart. Amber 2 explains to Mewtwo that she and all the others are clones, hence the 2 suffix in their names. She explains that the scientists call her Amber 2, but she is still Amber inside of her, which I love this idea because it tells Mewtwo again that whether she is the original Amber or a clone is irrelevant, and the same is said about him. They are the same person at the end of the day. What this says about Amber's soul is something that isn't expanded on, but rather left very vague. While Fuji is observing the clones, he hopes that his daughter will be able to live once more. He thinks back to before he had begun the Mewtwo project, to when he was attempting to clone Amber in the basement of his own home. His wife, however, upon catching him, was distraught over the loss of their daughter and became angry as he had attempted to, again, defy life and death itself, telling him that he could not and should not bring Amber back. She eventually left him, telling him that she loved their daughter as much as he did, but he needed to accept the fact that she was gone, and she could not continue to watch him continue his fruitless efforts. Later, Fuji and a scientist discuss the status of the clones, and how Giovanni will be happy to soon have the strongest Pokemon of all. Fuji, however, hopes that their efforts will grant him with the knowledge to finally be able to create a viable clone of Amber. This then confirms the idea that Fuji needed Giovanni's backing to even attempt at creating a perfect and stable clone of Amber. That he was a man broken and desperate, willing to sacrifice anything, even his own life, even his own morality, by working with somebody as horrible as Team Rocket and Giovanni. Amber 2 shows Mewtwo and the rest of the clones a memory where she used to live, and shows him elements of life, wind, sun, rain, and the times of the day. Mewtwo asks Amber 2 if the moon is the sun, and is told the moon is there instead to keep people from being afraid of the dark. Soon the clones slowly fade away, which the scientists lament as another failure. Inside Amber 2's Remember place, where she's showing these clones and Mewtwo all these beautiful things in our world, Mewtwo looks around for the other clones who are now missing and asks where they had gone. However, Amber 2 begins to fade away next, which one of the scientists notes quietly, meaning that she is passing away. And Fuji watches solemnly as the energy pulse in the tank slowly shows that she is gone. As Mewtwo, worried, asks Amber 2 what is happening as she hits those final moments of whatever life she has, she replies that it feels like it's time to say goodbye, and Mewtwo begins to cry at the loss of his friend, and Amber 2 still stands to assure him that it will be alright, and thanks him for caring about her. She tells him he will live, and that life is wonderful. However, as she is gone, he crawls out to her in sadness and fear, which then begins to manifest in the real world as a psychic emission, a spike in brain activity, and as alarm klaxons blare, Fuji orders his assistant to stabilize Mewtwo's powers by administering a memory-wiping serum. The serum almost fails to take effect, but gradually, Mewtwo calms down and falls asleep. The team is relieved, and while Dr. Fuji is glad Mewtwo survived, he is outraged that his daughter is gone forever. The final chance that he had, that when he sacrificed literally everything, his morality, his wife, his literally any other thought process he can have, effectively maybe even his own future freedom, because you and me know that Giovanni would never let him go if he succeeded. He would force Fuji to create more Mewtwo, and he did it all just to try and bring his daughter back. He sacrificed everything, and it still failed. As time passes on, Mewtwo slowly matures, and in its sleep, it states that it feels like it has been asleep for what seems like forever. It still has slight, foggy memories of Amber and ponders over her last words. Mewtwo's first interactions were ones of understanding. Interactions that told Mewtwo that, clone or not, he and the rest of the clones were living beings. And this sets the stage for the future story that would develop later on. A story where Mewtwo is effectively forced to find these answers that Amber gave him all over again within a world that sees him as just a monster. An unnatural monster that is meant to be weaponized against everything else that has ever existed. From this point, our paths begin to split in regards to Mewtwo and the characters surrounding Mewtwo in their stories. Because who created Mewtwo, or rather who had the most sway in its creation, varies between the types of media. So let's just begin with understanding that Giovanni was the person to fund the project, but who heads it is a different story. I actually want to begin with Fuji, man that would be caught in the explosion of Mewtwo's escape. In the anime, it seems like his life and everyone else's in the movies just ends. After all, Mewtwo did cause some pretty nasty damage, and I don't know about you, I can't survive an explosion like that. And instead of it being a lab on Cinnabar, it was a lab found on New Island, a place granted to Fuji from Giovanni. And it was on this island that Mewtwo would take its first breath after escaping the lab. Now in the games, we know Fuji proceeded to somehow survive the incident. We can very easily assume that he was there, as his journal entries do specifically state that Mewtwo could not be controlled. But then what happens? Well, the mansion burns, but the structure still stands. In addition, he leaves Cinnabar, and at the end of his life, he takes residence in Lavender Town, a place where the Pokemon Tower stands as the resting place for Pokemon when their lives come to an end. What's more interesting, though, is that at some point along the way, Blaine takes residence on Cinnabar right next to this lab, but that doesn't make any sense, and that's because it's not correct. Because through Fire Red Leaf Green, we find out two important bits of information. One is that Blaine has been on the island long before the lab was built inside the mansion, and two is that Blaine and Fuji have a photo that they've taken together, grinning widely, as the text states. These men were colleagues in the creation of Mewtwo. They made a major mistake as they used funding under Team Rocket to fuel their own research. They didn't care about anything other than their own goals. What this then means is that I get to finally show that once and for all, that Blaine and Fuji had turned a new leaf in not just the games, but in the manga as well. Because yes, I love the Pokemon Adventures manga, and people often disregard the events within it, even though many of our games will either take information from the manga, or the manga will simply expand on the information, which will then only be used in future games that Pokemon releases. This is something that has happened with Pokemon Legends ZA, and has been happening since the beginning, and I swear, one of these days I might just have to make a video on all the different treasure troves of differences that have happened, and knowing what the future of Pokemon might be before the games even release. But moving forward with the story, Blaine and Fuji create Mewtwo, and it still results in this explosion. In the version of the games, specifically, Fuji, again, moves to Lavender Town and cares for the graves of Pokemon. He's not just talking big either, he actually stands to try and protect Cubone from Team Rocket as they kill Marowak and take the skulls of their species to sell on the black market. This is not a drill, this is not me over-exaggerating, this is literally what is happening within the Pokemon games. And we can't even say Team Rocket was targeting the tower because of Fuji, because the Team Rocket grunts that were there didn't know him. They said that this old man just barged into our base and started calling us horrible people and tried to stop us. And it's not too much of a surprise either. He's changed enough visually, and this man avoids interviews within the Pokemon world through the Pokemon magazine called Pokemon Journal, all as potentially another attempt to ensure that Team Rocket doesn't find him again and cause more pain to more Pokemon with the knowledge he has. And there is one more message, where he addresses us as the character and states that instead of hoping for the happiness of just our Pokemon, can we instead wish for the happiness of all Pokemon? He won't say it directly here, but he knows his mistakes. He knows what he had done and the damage and pain he had caused. He is indirectly asking us to wish for the happiness of Mewtwo, the Pokemon whose life he created and ruined through his own knowledge and actions. Now, Fuji within the games and his connection to Mewtwo pretty much ends here. We save him and Cubone and put an end to Team Rocket, and in the manga, he only reprises his role as a man who takes care of the tower and its Pokemon, completely uninvolved in the creation of Mewtwo until we dig into the Fire Red Leaf Green volumes of the Adventures manga once again. Because then we get a very clear picture that Blaine and Fuji are involved in not just working together, but also finding Mew, an important asset towards creating Mewtwo, of course. Now, I will openly state that it is not directly stated that Blaine and Fuji are colleagues in the main games to creating Mewtwo directly, but other sources show that this project was completed together through their efforts combined. And I understand I could have said all this from the beginning, but I think it's really important to see the story as it was, and then see how the story has been changed to be more full and more robust, which has caused the whole story of Mewtwo to be so confusing alongside Mew. And one of these things that has made this story more robust, or allowing us to understand it a little bit better, is with Pokemon Masters of all things. And if you just groaned at the canonicity of Masters, allow me to share with you some information I received thanks to Boltoy, a trusted source of information that makes great Pokemon articles that I completely intend to cover at some point, and I highly recommend you check out. Now, thanks to Boltoy, we have 2 bits of information. One is that the developers of Masters have clearly stated that they're carefully choosing the dialogue of characters to ensure that they do not say anything that they would not say within the mainline games, meaning that we can take things like Blaine saying he worked with Fuji in Masters on Mewtwo as canon. More specifically, Yu Sasaki also states, to create these interactions, we considered the personalities and backgrounds of these trainers and made sure that our content did not deviate from that. If a character would never say or do a certain thing, we made sure that they do not in our game. In addition, Blaine's dialogue in the game strictly states, there is a facility called the Pokemon Research Lab on Cinnabar Island. They research very interesting things, such as Pokemon evolution and legends. Rearranging genes is a practical way to explore the infinite possibilities of Pokemon, and that's some difficult stuff, but the researchers at the lab all believe that they're doing the right thing. Back in the day, Fuji and I toiled to unlock those secrets too, and what we birthed, well, we thought it was a symbol of the true potential of Pokemon at the time. Then finally, to add to this, when we dig into the manga once more, we get some very different but arguably the coolest details regarding Blaine's involvement with Mewtwo that are absolutely not canon in the games or other media, but I of course want to talk about. And that would be Blaine's symbiotic relationship with Mewtwo. The only way in the Adventures manga that Blaine could complete Mewtwo is through adding in his own DNA, all because they could not complete Mewtwo from what they had from Mew. So he adds in his own, and Mewtwo's cells actually attack and bind themselves to Blaine's cells. When Mewtwo escapes, Mewtwo causes immense devastation and is eventually found by Red. With Blaine suddenly appearing, having tracking Mewtwo down, he admits his faults and states that they have to stop Mewtwo now, because their symbiotic connection allows them to know where each other are at all times. But the more Mewtwo uses its powers, the more this affliction spreads over Blaine and will eventually kill him. By the end of the struggle, Red captures Mewtwo and hands him over to Blaine, stating that Mewtwo has only known the lab, and that it's effectively Blaine's responsibility to start over with Mewtwo, that the two of them together can change for the better, and the two of them do agree to this. This whole moment is amazing, and the manga is my absolute favorite version of Pokemon's lore, bar none. It has amazing stakes, great depth, and it's just overall a great story, even if we remove the fact that it's Pokemon. It's just flat out good, and you should check out my coverage of the red and yellow arcs on this channel. At least do it for Mewtwo with a spoon tube, if you would. Now, the story does extend from here in the manga, and I know eventually they find ways to train together and make it less of a burden on Blaine, while Mewtwo is only allowed to fight in dire situations, especially as it could still kill Blaine from being overactive. So most of the time, in order to keep Blaine alive and stabilize Mewtwo, Mewtwo stays inside of a new fluid chamber. And we kind of jumped the gun a little bit here, because Blaine in the games doesn't do any of this with Mewtwo, but if we assume that the intent of the Pokemon Company over time was to have Blaine be involved with Mewtwo more and more, what are the results and hints? Well, there's one dialogue in Let's Go Pikachu Eevee, which goes as follows. Well done returning here to my gym. You're the one who retrieved the key to this gym from the Pokemon Mansion. Did you see anything interesting while you were in there? That place still holds the remnants of my old friend's research. This then clearly lets us know that even if Blaine in the mainline games isn't directly involved with the creation of Mewtwo, he knew everything surrounding it, Maybe he was consulted by Fuji. Maybe he was a shoulder to cry on for when Fuji realized his mistakes and he needed to confide in someone. Believe what you will, but I personally will absolutely be taking Pokemon Masters devs' word and that they are being honest, meaning that Blaine is involved canonically and now sits in the direct shadow of the mansion, ensuring that nobody makes the same mistakes that he once did alongside his colleague Fuji. And as one more side note regarding Pokemon Masters information, there was a leak very directly confirming that Masters does take place in a different universe, meaning that the events within them aren't canon, which we kind of already knew since they, have past and present, pro tags meeting each other. But it's nice to have another bit of confirmation while we also try to consider that the dialogue that people state are potentially canonical in terms of real main game lore. And I would say that we're done with, the very beginning of Mewtwo's story, but there's a slew, in fact, of important details brought to my attention by an individual known as Elements and stuff, who helped me understand what is likely the complete inspiration for the discovery of Mew, why Mew was found in the jungle, why was Mewtwo created, the real-life events that they are inspired by. I will be reading from the direct document that I was sent from Elements as to not muddy up their words. A small chunk of it might sound repetitive, but it's important to restate information in this new context with all the evidence present as we go along. The discovery of Mew is perhaps the pivotal story moment of Generation 1, as it appears to have driven the plot in ways we are still seeing play out today. Many characters are involved in the in-game version, and vastly more in the real-life references to historical events of the 1990s. To begin with the journal entries found in the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island across all games, which takes place solely in Kanto, in the Gold, Silver, Crystal, Heart Gold, and Soul Silver. They actually take place after the island is burned down, and as such the Pokemon Mansion is considered destroyed by this point in the timeline. Now note that the last recorded eruption of the volcano in question, Izuoshima, was in 1990, but frequent tremors were being observed from 1994 to 1995. Perhaps causing Game Freak to believe at the time that another eruption was likely imminent and why it happened within the world. The document then also talks about the journals we did already speak on and how there were mistranslations in the very first entries in English. Rather, in Japanese then, the exact country in South America is spelled Guyana, though this is not the country English speakers would understand as Guyana, as that is written differently, and instead refers to French Guiana. This stems from how different countries refer to the different Guianas, of which there were once 5. The French refer to Guyana as Guyane Britannique, British Guyana, and to French Guyana as simply Guyana. Likewise, the English and all English-speaking countries refer to Guyana simply by its name and prefix French Guyana to indicate the difference between them. There were also once Dutch Guyana, which is Suriname, Spanish Guyana, Venezuela, and Portuguese Guyana, Brazil. Given that the story of Generation 1 is known to take place in 1996, we then have to find an expedition to an island in French Guiana at some point before this that focused on either genetics or archaeology. Also, if I keep switching between Guyana and Guyana, bear with me, I apologize. And thankfully, we have both, and surprisingly, at the same time. In 1989, a project to study treetop biology in the Amazon jungle was proposed by France and assorted countries in response to deforestation threats to the Amazon by Japanese and other economic threats or interests, which had been catapulted into the international conversation after the death of Chico Mendes, the rubber tapper union leader who had first blown the whistle on exploitative Amazonian commercial practices. Meanwhile, Japan had plans to build a highway connecting Peru with the western side of Brazil, destroying a significant portion of the Amazon rainforest in the process and importing the subsequent Amazonian timber to meet its wood demands. This was met with fierce opposition from the United States, who claimed Japan was deliberately importing Amazonian lumber rather than using their own. This claim was, at the time, true. The highway was eventually cancelled due to intense lobbying by the United States and other European nations. The Treetop Biology Project initially lacked funding, but in a surprise move by the Sankin-kai Economic Consortium of Japan, a group of several corporations and businesses, it received full funding in exchange for Japanese control over a film to be produced during the voyage and shown at the 1990 International Exposition, often shortened to Expo 90, in Osaka, Japan, titled Flying Raft. The title derives from the peculiar and somewhat fantastical methodology of the study. Researchers were to travel aboard a flying airship that would hover above the treetops, gently setting a massive inflatable net atop them that scientists could then descend onto and begin taking DNA and other samples to avoid disturbing the ecology. This ship, designed by Frenchman Gilles Eversalt, was named by the Japanese filmmakers as the Heartopia. And this Heartopia was initially set to investigate the Rio Queiroz of Brazil in early July of 1989. But French snubbing of Brazilian governments during international meetings and subsequent tension, as well as the overthrow of the old military dictatorship in 1985, making major changes in Brazilian international relations, led to the Heartopia being forcefully asked to leave by the new government. So without official guidance, they decided to change their location to a site near the under-construction Petite Saut Dam in French Guiana, owned by France, which its local government was much more amenable to their presence, landing them in the Three Trees site near the dam location on October 5th, 1989, and successfully carried out their mission and completed filming by October 11th, 1989. Some of these dates should start sounding really familiar to you. Hopefully I didn't lose you, with eyes being completely glazed over. I know it's a lot of information. We need to get through it because it's all going to come together soon. Meanwhile, another project was taking place just a stone's throw away, if not in conjunction, a preventative archaeology rescue of the Native American, then Amerindian, sites of the area that were being cleared to make access roads for the Petite Saut Dam. These excavations, carried out between July 1989 and some point in 1994 by Stéphane Vacher, Sylvie Jérémy, and Jérôme Briand, discovered evidence of Kalina and other indigenous peoples' history dating as far back as 1,660 years, and found several structures amounting to 273 sites of interest across the 310 square kilometers of land for the Petite Saut Dam's access roads and possibly on the island itself. Then we can already begin to see that the mission timelines line up quite well with the Pokemon Mansion journals, with some changes, beginning in early July, and in the Heartopia's case, ending before February, presumably of the next year. It also lines up almost exactly with the other known portion of the story, relayed in Pokemon Emerald more than 8 years later, Faraway Island. Upon this island, which requires a highly specific map, the Old Sea map, to get to, players will find a living Mew which they can catch. This event was only legitimately released in Japan, and given that Mew was previously associated with deep in the Amazon jungle, its presence on an island seems really strange, unless one considers that there are islands in the middle of the Amazon, specifically river islands like Petite Saut. While it's somewhat unclear what the island looked like before the dam was constructed in the real world, its general shape is a decent match for Faraway Island, as are the presence of heavily forested landmasses on either side. Furthermore, the tie-in to the anime's insistence that Mew was discovered in some kind of ancient temple is readily attributable to the archaeological work done around this same time, which likely would have been covered, or at least briefly, in Flying Raft. I'll also personally add that we get these ancient temples in cards and in Pokemon Snap as stated earlier, but let's continue with the document. Also on Faraway Island is a wooden sign, with writing that has faded by the time the player of Emerald encounters it. There's an old note that looks like it was written a long time ago. Unknown month, 6th day. If people will live here again, reveal your kind heart. A sign expressing that wish is what I will leave behind. Fuji. There are several things to note here. The first is the note ends with the signature G, which has been popularly interpreted as Fuji. Second, the English translation specifies a month within the last 4 of the year: September, October, November, or December. If we assume the month in question is October, this would then be written the day after the Heartopia crew would have arrived at Petite Saut at October 5th, 1989, and left just 6 days later on October 11th, 1989. The reason many interpret the sign as having been written by Fuji is specifically because of his known history with Mewtwo and Team Rocket, as we have discussed. Fuji, as we first met him in Kanto, has a virulent hatred of Team Rocket. In Fire Red and Leaf Green, this is expanded upon via the Fame Checker. First, in Lavender Town, with a little girl who says, "What does this person do? He's really kind. He looks after abandoned and orphaned Pokemon." Then in the Pokemon Tower, the Team Rocket grunt states, "What is this person like? This old guy marched right up to our hideout." Then he starts ranting about how Team Rocket's abusing Pokemon, so we're just taking over as adults. Lavender Town, again, we get another man that states, "There's a rumor. I hear that Mr. Fuji's not originally from these parts." And according to people who know him or have met him in town, Fuji is just a shy man who isn't originally from Lavender Town. We next get confirmation of his involvements on Cinnabar Island from multiple sources, including the Fame Checker, Blaine's dialogue, and of course the Pokemon Mansion itself, showing us, again, the photo of Blaine and Fuji standing shoulder to shoulder with big grins. Or in the Pokemon Journal, asking, "What is this person like?" The shy Mr. Fuji turned down our interview requests. He's a kindly old man who is adored and respected in Lavender Town. Blaine, in Masters EX, of course, states that he is a hot-headed Blaine, stating directly that he used to do research with Fuji as a shorter version of what I stated earlier, as I'll also spare you the rest of the information we've already talked about regarding Blaine's dialogue. Either way, from all of this, Fuji's involvement becomes even more clear, as Pokemon researchers working at the Cinnabar lab, Blaine and Fuji, would have specialized in genetics. There are notes that state that Pokemon whose genetic code was repeatedly recombined for research then resulted in something vicious. Two additional lines of dialogue do tell us what their specializations were basically directly. One is through the knowledge that a Pokemon whose genetic code was repeatedly recombined for research. It turned vicious as a result, speaking about Mewtwo. In addition, we get to learn it was created by a scientist after years of horrific gene splicing and DNA engineering experiments. As such, Fuji's involvement becomes the clearest it can get, as Pokemon researchers working at the Cinnabar lab, Blaine and Fuji, would have specialized in genetics, specifically the genetics of fossil Pokemon that could be extracted from fossils and restored to a living Pokemon, a service offered to trainers by the lab as of 1996. This makes Fuji far more likely to be a part of the genetic study aboard the Heartopia than in the archaeological study, which fits with his role in the Birth of Mewtwo and the anime lore regarding Mew being cloned from that fossilized eyelash, which, as Element states, from rooted hair would be a very good source of DNA, and I'm happy that we're on the same page of that, though I will admit Elements definitely knows way more on all of that fossilization, archaeological stuff, rocks than I would know, but it's nice to see the confirmation. The discovery of a Mew fossil could have been done by the archaeological team also visiting Petite Sot around this time, as they were actually on site in the correct time frame, while the Heartopia would not arrive for several more months. And Fuji could have obtained a relevant DNA sample after hearing about this sometime after the Heartopia team arrived at Petite Sot, Faraway Island, on October 5th, 1989. As such, to try and break this down and help this be a little bit more manageable mentally, 7/5/1989, Fuji and the others receive word of the discovery of a Pokemon somewhere in the Amazon jungle of French Guiana, likely the archaeological discovery of a Mew fossil at or near the Petite Sot area by the Preventative Archaeology Operating Crew. 7/10/1989, the discovered Pokemon is officially named Mew. It's unclear if there is a living Mew at this time. 10/5/1989, the Heartopia arrives on site and begins sampling DNA from the treetops. Fuji is likely aboard. 10/6/1989, Fuji prepares to leave Faraway Island, leaving a sign that expresses his wishes for only kind-hearted people to visit the island again. At this point, either the living Mew or the fossil would have to have been discovered. 10/11/1989, the Heartopia, having completed filming and study, departs from the Petite Sot area. February 6th, 1990 to 1996, Mew gives birth to Mewtwo, witnessed and likely engineered by Fuji. Note that Mewtwo's Pokédex entries refers years of horrific gene splicing required to create it. This was not done in a few days and a few months. It was literal years of experimenting on Pokemon under the watch of Giovanni. Then we get into 9/1, 1990 to 1996. Fuji laments being unable to control Mewtwo's violence. Mewtwo likely escapes around this point, and then Pokemon Mansion is likely burned down at this time. It's unclear when the last two journal entries take place, but it can be reasonably presumed that they take place relatively early in the range, giving Mr. Fuji time to become well known as a kindly old man who hates Team Rocket in Lavender Town in 1996, and giving the Pokemon Mansion time to become derelict and abandoned. At the same time, this seems slightly anachronous with Mewtwo's Pokedex entries and the presence of burglars in the Pokemon Mansion. No valuables would reasonably be left behind if the mansion burned down 6 years ago, unless certain sections of the burnt mansion have only been rendered accessible by time or effort, which seems to potentially be the case, judging by the presence of ladders in holes between floors. Likewise, if we assume that Fuji left Cinnabar Island in 1990, this makes years of horrific gene splicing experiments have an unclear time frame in relation to Mewtwo's development, and an unclear relationship with Fuji's current personality as a kindly old man who loves and cares for all Pokemon. However, this still gives Mewtwo a very short development time between being born and breaking out of containment, at about 208 days or just under 7 months. Possibly too short, though this still remains unclear and we're covering bases. If we assume Mew is also cloned from a fossil obtained somewhere between October 5th, 1989 and October 11th, 1989, the amount of time Fuji could have been on the island, this also makes Mew go from being born, or cloned, to giving birth to Mewtwo in less than half a year. October 5th, 1989 to February 6th, 1990, or 125 days of time. Finally, for every additional year we might add to this time period to make things more reasonable for Mew and Mewtwo's development, one must be taken away from Mewtwo's age at the time of the Generation 1 games, where it already appears fully grown, but it could be no more than 6 years old. The sign there at the island could also be a reference to the Petite Sot Dam and the deforestation of the Amazon forest. It's also possible that Fuji revisited Faraway Island to help Mew escape there and wrote the sign then. While this would certainly then explain the creation of the old sea map, as otherwise there would be little need to point out Faraway Island in particular without a living Mew specimen with a fossil discovery before 1989, and the navigation of the Heartopia would likely have been done through GPS, which was publicly available as Navstar since 1983. This remains unclear and seems unlikely though, given Fuji could readily have written the sign during his first trip to the island as well. Given that Fuji would not have sailed to the island the first time, it seems more likely the old sea map was created either after the fact or well before. The latter seems much more likely if one wants to call it an old map in 1996 to 2004, just 7 to 15 years after Fuji and or the Heartopia would have used it. Assuming then that the Kalina are meant to be the builders of whatever archaeological or other structure the Mew fossil was found in, their first contact with Europeans would have been in 1492 by Christopher Columbus. And while it is unclear when exactly the Petite Sot area was discovered prior to the construction of the dam, it could be reasonably assumed that there would be no particular reason to single out the island unless someone knew that a Mew or a fossilized Mew or a temple containing a fossilized Mew was on the island. This would then imply that legends or tales of Mew or the structure containing it were known historically. This then makes Giovanni and Team Rocket as a whole a likely stand-in for Sankin Kai. Even his Japanese Sakaki is similar enough that the coincidence can't be ignored. Giovanni's exact role in Mewtwo's creation is unclear, but definitely confirmed to exist as of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon via the Rainbow Rocket episode. Without any player characters to stop him, Giovanni successfully captured Mewtwo in an alternate timeline and uses it as his final challenge to anyone strong enough to get in his way. And I don't know about you, my dear listener, but I am heavily convinced by Element's words, and I want to see thank yous in the comment section for what not only Elements was able to share with me, but also Boltoy for the information that they shared as well. That way I could bring it to you with their permission. And maybe, again, you should go look at Boltoy's articles before I cover some of them. Now, I also want to note that theoretically there should be multiple Mew, but we really don't have any full confirmation of that. Alternatively, I've sort of started believing the idea that with how goofy Mew can be, that it may have split itself into multiples of itself to play, and when they transformed into other Pokemon, they kind of forgot how to transform back. Or, more realistically, Mew probably left a bunch of its cells all over the place by accident, then somehow we get the whole mitochondria going inside of a cell, bada bing bada boom evolution as a whole. I wouldn't take either of those at verbatim for lore, but it's a possibility, and we're never really going to get an answer as to how Pokemon came into existence, other than knowing that Mew was the first Pokemon in which many other Pokemon then derived from, with it as its ancestor. I will note that it gets really weird though when we talk about Mew and the Tree of Life, and how their symbiotic connection works, but I won't talk about that here. I have a whole video explaining how legendary Pokemon affect ecology, where I dig into that movie and its implications as part of Mew's section, which would be Lucario and the Mystery of Mew. But we still aren't done, because there's plenty more to discuss regarding Mewtwo, and in fact, there's one more person who helped create Mewtwo, I'm putting in heavy quotations, a person you would never expect, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's absolutely not canonical, but I have to mention it, Bill. Yes, creator of the Pokemon PC system, Bill. Because in order to complete Mewtwo, Giovanni blackmails Bill and even kidnaps his wife. Yes, unfortunately, for all of you interested in the super genius, he is married. All before he eventually completes Mewtwo, and then his wife is released. Again, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it, but I have to mention it, especially if someday they just swing the hammer and actually do make Bill's involvement with the creation of Mewtwo canonical. I doubt they ever will, since they're definitely using information from the Pokemon Adventures manga, and then that story was from the Pocket Monsters manga, so completely separate things, but who knows. Alright, so we're finally at the part where Mewtwo has properly broken containment. Sound the alarms! SCP-150 has escaped containment. Actually, what is SCP-150? Oh god, it's a parasite that looks like a tongue louse and changes the host's nervous system and feeds on nutrients while completely assimilating and turning you into a creature that's still conscious of its fate while having no self-autonomy. That's horrifying. No thank you. I don't want that. I'll take Mewtwo over that. But back on track, we actually go to Mewtwo Strikes Back to finally properly talk about it. But more importantly, we have the 4Kids version, and then we have the proper version that didn't make Mewtwo an absolute villain in black and white, but actually spoke to the deeper and grayer area of philosophical sides. And so I bring to you the following, which was originally written by GameSpot, who then provided further sources that we can track down to be reliable. In a series of blogs, Takeshi Shudo, chief writer for the original series of the anime and the first movie, detailed his original plans for Pokemon, the first movie. He wrote the prologue to the film in order to make a film that not only entertained kids, but mentally stimulated their parents with some tough questions of existentialism. The conflict of his film came from Mewtwo's struggle to find meaning to its existence. This is far less ambitious in the version of the movie localized for Western audiences. In the original, there is no wanting to annihilate the world and rule it. All Mewtwo wants is answers to the questions regarding its identity, purpose, and most of all, its value. Mewtwo then decides the best way to do this is by testing its power. If Mewtwo is stronger than the strongest Pokemon trainers, or even Mew, then surely its life has value. If Mewtwo's clone army can defeat natural-born Pokemon, then they must have a more valid reason to live than the originals, right? Well, while Mewtwo does mention that humans aren't fit to rule the world, when asked, he mentions that Pokemon aren't fit either. He's just trying to figure out his place the only way he learned how. The original version of Mewtwo is not just a maniacally evil and genocidal psychopath, but a villain with depth and an actual character arc. So what happened? Well, turns out Nintendo and 4Kids happened. The official, very 90s US website for the movie clearly states that Pokemon, the first movie, had to be virtually reimagined for American audiences. Nintendo, which owns all rights to Pokemon in America, brought 4Kids Entertainment, who also localized Yu-Gi-Oh! And One Piece in the US, on board to essentially Americanize the movie. 4Kids is of course infamous for censoring shows all the time, which is hilarious because now there's a bunch of edits on YouTube doing like what if 4Kids made this and just changing the blood, changing the cigarettes, the lollipops, and everything else? And then going as far as, in the Pokemon anime, giving us the legendary mistake, weird censoring of rice balls being called jelly donuts by Brock. And in the year between the Japanese and US releases of the movie, 4Kids Norman Grossfield dramatically rewrote the script, incorporating all new story elements, according to the website. They also rescored the entire movie with music that Grossfield thought better reflected what American kids would respond to. And these changes did not set well with the writers and producers of the original Japanese version. As written in an essay and quoted by Tobin in Pikachu's Global Adventure, The Rise and Fall of Pokemon, executive producer Masakazu Kubo wrote that the people at Warner gave us some hassle over the script. According to them, the Japanese original does not distinguish clearly enough between the good guys and the bad. According to Kubo, then, the distributor told him that the viewers would not be able to know who to identify with and who to cheer on. In other words, the heroes and villains needed to be identified clearly. And not only do I have a problem with that, because that means that you're treating your audience even dumber, not giving them the challenge of learning media literacy, but I have the gripe with that it goes completely against the writer's intent. You can do that for your fan fiction, but when you are a producing company who is supposed to follow the original intent and properly translate things over, working alongside the original creators, and you decide to go the opposite direction to tell them it's not good enough and that it needs to change to be better fitting for an audience when in fact you have a specific story you're trying to teach the audience, well then you're effectively completely disrespecting the creator who intended to put forth the time, effort, and money necessary to share their project with more people. And it just makes me incredibly upset to think about the fact that anybody would do that. And it's still something that happens in the modern day. I'm sure you could think of a couple of different examples because guess what? People don't care enough and think that they need to placate to, I don't know, whoever gives them the most money, which is not how that always works. But whatever, back on track with what the article states. While the heartbreaking fight is going on, we cut to the human characters witnessing the carnage. And here is where the biggest and arguably worst change happens. In the US dub, which was then translated in all Western countries, the characters realize that violence is wrong, and Pokemon absolutely never fight one another, which is a very strange message to have in a movie based on a franchise that's all about having Pokemon fight each other and would continue to have Pokemon fight each other for almost 30 years now, especially as even in the most recent Legends ZA, we find out that battling Pokemon is absolutely encouraged because it's the best way for Pokemon and people to fully understand each other, something that's really kind of shown since the first series that came out, the first couple of seasons even. It brings people from all walks of life together and lets them experience new things. Only this isn't the message of the original script, since the whole point of Mewtwo was that it wanted to find its place in the world, and fighting was the only way to show that the clones' lives had more value. The human character's moment of realization then, in the original script, involves them talking about how both originals and copies are still living creatures, and therefore their lives have value intrinsically, automatically, which is exactly the point of this moment being a parallel to what happened with Ambertwo before she passed away. It doesn't matter if you're a human or a Pokemon, it doesn't matter if you're a clone or not. They are all the same. Life is beautiful, and even Ambertwo said herself that she is still Amber. And when Ash gets petrified and the Pokemon tears bring him back, both Mew and Mewtwo finally realize that all lives are meaningful, whether human or Pokemon, original or lab grown. And while of course we still have the beautiful lines from both Mewtwo and Meowth, I think those lines would have resonated even more with the original writing that was intended. Of course, we kind of still hit the same end point, it's just that things would have aligned better. As a tangent, some of the most effective media out there is exactly what this original script was intended to do, which is primarily target itself towards children to entertain them, while also giving the adults who bring those children to the movie theater or sit down on the couch to watch TV with them something to digest, something to enjoy, something to walk away from with new thoughts and ideas. And I'm not just, again, talking about enjoying visuals, I'm talking about all the different stories and ideas that follow along with it. Because of course, children wanted to watch things like Who Framed Roger Rabbit. You get to see the one and only major crossover between the Warner Brothers and Disney characters, but it talked about grief and pain of losing a loved one. Powerpuff Girls, I watched growing up with my mom, and it had so many different stories where the villains had more motive than just being evil, that they did have emotions and could change even if it was just for a moment. Even has lessons on family, trust, and general life. Then with Animaniacs, I mean, come on, they're the quippiest bunch. Yakko being the eldest, snarky brother, teaching others and taking care of his family. Wacko being the absolute goof for those visual gags and strong emotions, probably appealing to children the most. And Dot for a representation of not fitting into the traditional housewife role as you grow up and go a bit against the grain, and she still decides to be a girly girl to try and be pretty here and there. Of course, these are also how I remember these pieces of media from so long ago, but they still serve to be incredibly effective and resonate for years, if not decades, with their audience, like that original script was meant to be. And I think the most recent example of this in the modern day in great effect is Bluey, even though I know nothing about it. All I know is that children love to watch it, and parents find themselves being taught something as well through watching it. And all of this is what was missed when 4Kids excised the original writing as if it were a tumor. They would lose part of the depth and weight that was intended to hit all ages and made people confused as to the purpose of Mewtwo, its life, and its story from the very beginning. And not to add one more to the mix, but I'm going to add one more to the mix, but recently my fiance and I watched Over Our Neighbor's Kid, and we watched the first Rugrats movie. And let me tell you, the sheer number of adult jokes, conversations, and themes are amazing. I think in the first 30 minutes, Stu was being scolded for not having a job, having no savings, no insurance, and then he has another kid on the way, interrogated about how he was gonna manage it. And I also find it a little bit funny because there were some very progressive themes in that movie here and there that people would call woke if it was remade in the modern day, all because their tiny brains can't comprehend equality and happiness for others. But ultimately, when 4Kids ripped the deeper themes that grade the morality of Mewtwo and the clones out, it wasn't just a disservice to the original creators, it was a disservice to us as the audience. But again, I'll still say, it still hit a good note at the end that stays with us all. We do have a lot in common. The same earth, the same air, the same sky. Maybe if we started looking at what's the same instead of what's different, well, who knows? And this is something that will drive forward with Mewtwo's other shorter tales throughout his life. Mewtwo has had a couple of other appearances that makes it feel a little bit more tied to world lore, or at least makes Mewtwo seem like it will always show up, while also resulting in the same end product or giving it its final character arcs. A very short one is its shadow form appearing within Pokken Tournament. Shadow Mewtwo is pretty cool to see in concept, horrifying when you realize that this implies Mewtwo is now properly corrupted and will destroy everything with ease. After all, this Shadow Mewtwo also has the ability to Mega Evolve. He appears under the care of a character by the name of An, or Anne is how that's actually said, don't know why I said it that way. Either way, that Mewtwo had actually saved when she had touched a Dark Synergy Stone, which was going to absorb into her body. The normal Synergy Stones are located entirely within the region of Pokken's game, known as Gaia. It's how you communicate better with your Pokemon and unleash massive bursts of power. These bursts of power are absolutely sick, by the way, because it helps bypass the need for a Keystone or a Mega Stone, allowing your Pokemon to Mega Evolve. And then on top of that, there are a lot of Pokédex entries in that game, or moves in general, that are shown in their full power, such as Chandelure's Dex, stating that it hypnotizes its prey before burning up their soul, something we can only fully see properly in Pokken. Unfortunately, back on track, the Darkstone nearly corrupted Anne, Mewtwo saved her, and became this form that is just fused with the stone and is draining power from all stones across Gaia as it travels around. This effectively makes Shadow Mewtwo stronger, while slowly eliminating all possible threats, and of course, it Mega Evolves on its own, so that's a bit scary, or terrifying even. As part of this story, you're able to separate it from the Dark Synergy Stones and everyone's happy. But this wouldn't be the only time that Mewtwo began a true and seemingly unstoppable rampage. In the animated series, Mewtwo is forced under the control of Giovanni with the additional use of special armor, Armored Mewtwo, as I keep calling Mecha Mewtwo for some reason. And it's here where even Gary Oak faces off against the weaponized biological terror while claiming that Mewtwo is evil once again. And when we look at the original wording, this was yet another dub mistake. Gary was truly only supposed to say that he couldn't do anything against Mewtwo, not claim any sort of good or bad morals regarding it, because he flat out looks Ash dead in the eyes and says, "This Pokemon's different, it's evil." So, you know, a little bit more dramatic because they, again, wanted to hit the whole idea of black and white, morality, good and bad. Long story short, we do get to see before that moment Gary effectively winning what should have been the badge from Giovanni high up on his chair, only for Giovanni to state that he wants to test out one last Pokemon, and Armored Mewtwo is then revealed, wiping the floor with two of Gary's Pokemon and leaving him helpless as he literally whites out. And before Ash and the gang arrive to see him and his posse all passed out, Giovanni releases Mewtwo, saying that he has an important emergency mission, meaning that instead of fighting Giovanni for the gym badge, Ash actually fights Team Rocket as they stand in his place, which is a little bit weird, considering that I just immediately assumed the gym leader here is evil with something like that happening, but Mewtwo is then not seen for the rest of the episode. Instead, we just actually never get to see what that means when he said emergency. And unless I missed something, which is possible, I could not find the follow-up to this emergency mission that Giovanni talks about. But that's an animated series, I suppose. It could have also just been a lead-in to other media, such as the movie, but it wasn't, because it turns out this episode aired after the movie was released. So there's seriously no actual follow-up to this that I could find. Let me know in the comments if any of you do find out what Giovanni was implying or what the follow-up to this episode was, please. For now though, we'll move on to another brief mention where Mewtwo appeared as a Mirage Pokemon. And here's where we get to see a scientist creating full-on Pokemon copies that have physical bodies and powers despite being called mirages or holograms. I'm sure you could already see the parallels here. They also learn moves they otherwise shouldn't, like an Aggron with Bullet Seed, which they do call out in the episode. And the first sign that something has gone wrong is Mew appearing while the Mirage Master is terrified of it appearing, or rather incredibly upset. Professor Oak gets a whole 5 seconds of talking with Mew and being excited, saying, "Oh my gosh, I found you. The 151st Pokemon, you're actually here," before it gets attacked, called a flawed specimen, and is insulted out of the room crying by this man. And this is because even just a false, non-biological clone of Mew has such a pure heart that even this Mirage acts like the real Mew. It has the pure heart of the 151st Pokemon and acts like it in its entirety, unlike these other cloned Pokemon. This all comes to a head at the creation of Mewtwo, the strongest of all Mirage Pokemon, of course. And this was only completed after the Mastermind draws memories from Pikachu to access all Pokemon data from Pokemon Centers and the Pokemon PCs and create his Mirage Mewtwo, who of course has just as an explosive entrance as he did in the first movie. And I'll be honest, got a little bit of chills from Mewtwo's reveal because they gave it all the reverence it needed in this special episode. All while saying every single attack is available to Mewtwo, unlike the real Mewtwo, meaning the Mirage Master claims it is truly perfect now. Oak tries using his own Dragonite against it, and the gang has to make a retreat, which things only get wilder when Entei, Articuno, and Zapdos all appear at the same time as Mirages. It's like a legendary Pokemon flash sale. They also reveal that the Mirage Master is Dr. Young, the scientist who first created all the Mirage Pokemon, and that Dr. Young had been evil all along, showing us a full parallel to the first creation of Mewtwo now. Now, Mewtwo flat out kills Mew, and Dr. Young smiles as he says, "Good riddance, flawed specimen." And I was shocked. Like, yeah, I get that it's a mirage, but still, they seem real to the rest of our characters. And the scream of Mew was just horrifying in this episode. And it gets worse when Mewtwo absorbs all the Pokemon data and starts having like boils, like body horror, appear in the shape of other powerful legendary Pokemon, their heads poking out as if they were trapped under its skin. One was even Rayquaza, which then allowed Mewtwo to unleash multiple attacks at once, with all of these Pokemon being a part of its body now. And the only thing that saves the day is Mew's data is now inside of Mewtwo, who had absorbed all of the data of the Pokemon Mirage system, allowing Mew to hold Mewtwo back, as it goes as far as allowing the team to destroy the entire Mirage system by attacking it, an act that will save everyone, but will erase Mew and everyone else in the system. And it seems like an easy decision when you just assume they're Mirages, but they were clearly shown to have their own thoughts, emotions, their own consciousness, at least potentially, with Mew breaking free from the simulated consciousness and control that Dr. Young imposed on it and the rest of the Pokemon that we see. It brings a lot of morality questions to the front when we think about it deep enough, and once again, I'm still surprised about it. Nevertheless, Mewtwo and Mew are seen throughout this special, roughly 40 minutes long, as foils to one another as they are meant to be. They're effectively opposite forces always. What is supposed to be seen as nature and an affront to it, natural life and cloned life, a creation made of peace, made to represent the heart's purity, and the biomachine of war. But despite it all, this biomachine of war that Mewtwo is, falls apart, as Mewtwo is still a Pokemon, albeit a very intelligent and incredibly powerful Pokemon, and its power only rises further once it attains Mega Evolution. Mewtwo achieving Mega Evolution is a bit strange when we start to think about it long enough, because from our understanding of Mega Evolution's energy being connected to the ultimate weapon firing and how that was done through the power of life energy, which Xerneas and Yveltal govern over, we have to ask, how did they get Mewtwo's life energy? Or rather, how did they get enough energy for Mewtwo to have a Mega Stone in the first place? Well, it's as simple as understanding that every single time the ultimate weapon is fired, new Mega Stones are created. Thank you, Legends ZA, for making this very clear to us. Considering we don't see Mewtwo in X and Y until after the main event of the game, it makes sense that it could have a Mega Stone after the weapon has been fired in the modern day, and all it takes is for Mewtwo to gather the energy to create one for itself or find one for itself. Once again though, we have to question how enough energy would be gathered from Mewtwo's life to then create a Mega Stone, because after all, each stone is very specific to a Pokemon, meaning it is composed of that Pokemon's life energy. If we consider that Mew's life energy is in every Pokemon, then we can understand that it's very easy for Mewtwo to Mega Evolve. All because Mew is the ancestor of all Pokemon, meaning that Mewtwo is likely actually creating its Mega Stone from general life energy that is tied to Mew. And if we make this assumption, then we can further assume that this is why we also see Mewtwo Mega Evolve in the anime, the Mystery Dungeon games, and in Pokken without the need for a Mega Stone. It just needs to be filled with enough life energy to transform on its own, which is kind of what we get with Rogue Mega Evolution anyway. But the difference between them and Mewtwo is that Mewtwo is completely capable of keeping itself under control while accessing its X form and its Y form. I'm still shocked that it didn't get a Z form, but I guess ZA has plenty of life left to reveal a few more Megas, whether it be through promo matches or through another DLC. Now, this Mega form, in general, either of them, are insanely powerful, allowing Mewtwo to reach the peak of physical or psychic power, depending on which form it uses. And there's one more terrifying moment that occurs as Giovanni in one universe gets his grubby money-making paws on Mewtwo one last time. In at least one timeline, Giovanni is able to not only get Mewtwo under his thumb completely, but he is also able to Mega Evolve Mewtwo. And with Mega Evolution only being complete when Pokemon and trainers' bonds are strong enough, it means that this Mewtwo is theoretically the only actually evil Mewtwo, at least in theory. Not only does it appear with Giovanni here, but also within Pokemon Masters with the same Rainbow Rocket Giovanni, and while this is more surface level, when we do dig a little bit deeper, we get into some potential scarier implications. Giovanni may have actually caused the death of Green, the last of our trio of characters Red and Blue, a character that is otherwise missing unless we consider her appearance in Leaf Green and Let's Go Pikachu Eevee, with the two of them definitely being the same person, while also still missing from the Alolan games. Mewtwo's Mega Stone would have been in Green's possession if it wasn't for the main character of the Let's Go games beating her to the punch. But that main character would have never had the chance to get the Mega Stone if Red never beat Giovanni a few years prior to the events of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which is exactly what happens in Rainbow Rocket Giovanni's timeline. Now, I do have an entire video explaining how Green is the dead follower of Alola, as I fully flex my forensic science investigations degree over a video game of all things. But the short of it is that Red lost to Giovanni, we know this. He took over Kanto, defeated Blue and Green, took the Mega Stone from Mewtwo, captured Mewtwo, and then he appears as the Rainbow Rocket leader with Mewtwo finally under his control. There's also some potential connections as to why Mewtwo exists in the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon universe, and how it has to mean that Team Rocket existed in that world prior to the Mystery Dungeon events. So if you want more on this whole theory, go check out Green being the dead follower video. Instead, here though, I would like to focus on the more positive final stories of Mewtwo. The common theme in which Mewtwo becomes not a weapon meant to destroy, but rather becomes a shield to all life. Mewtwo becomes a protector of not only clone Pokemon, but all life ever since the end of the Mewtwo movie. And the stories are ultimately the same, as we learn that Mewtwo not only wipes Ash's memory of him to keep him and the clones safe, which is explicitly stated the next time they meet, such as in the Genesect movie, but that Mewtwo also relocates the clone Pokemon. They live in peace, in a remote location far away from humanity. They serve to exist on their own, equal in nature to any other traditionally born Pokemon, and there's peace until other people start to make their way in, such as Team Rocket. And while that story resolves itself as you would expect, it's when we have the Genesect movie where its major role is in first trying to tell Genesect that it is just causing wanton destruction for no reason and putting lives in danger. And of course, when Genesect doesn't listen, a full battle ensues. These two have paralleled stories, both created by an evil faction of humanity, both being bioweapons, both being very, very powerful creatures. The greatest difference though, other than Team Rocket making Mewtwo and Team Plasma making Genesect, is that Genesect was once a living creature that already existed in the prehistoric world. And as a side, a lot of people might claim that Kabutops is Genesect, but neither of their typings nor the time period in which they were alive lines up at all. Plus, Kabutops doesn't have the same body structure, such as where Genesect's wings would be if they weren't turned into the very, very deadly cannon that it has on its back. But that aside, these two purple Pokemon of man's creation duke it out, as Mewtwo now protects the lives that it was created to destroy as a weapon of Team Rocket. And this wouldn't be the last time that it does so, that it defies its purpose, because we find this to happen one last time within Kalos. Deep in an unnamed cave that parallels a similar cave in Kanto that I'm sure you know, is Mewtwo. Just outside of this cave, across a little bit of water you have to surf across, is the Pokemon Village, a place where Pokemon gather for safety, to escape humans, to find peace. A place that Wolfric visits to help care for these Pokemon, but is otherwise untouched by humanity. In the game, we actually get no confirmation that Mewtwo is here to protect these Pokemon, but we get that confirmation within the Pokemon Adventures manga. And once again, considering the manga gets referenced a number of times within Legends ZA, we can see how these stories should line up. Because within the manga and the ZA timeline of events, we learn that Team Flare actively tries to capture Mewtwo with the intent to help have it be used as the fuel for the ultimate weapon. Because while Xerneas and Yveltal hold a lot of power, they are effectively just a battery that they need to use to attract and store energy, to store it and release it with the use of the ultimate weapon. They still need a fuel source. And this is where the Menhir Stones come in, devices that when a Pokemon is attached to them and the ultimate weapon is activated with Yveltal's power, then allows the stones to steal energy from the attached Pokemon and give it to the ultimate weapon. From there, Xerneas distributes the energy, but the weapon still changes that energy into something different, something more concentrated that then acts as a weapon or as a life-giving device if only Anj is actively being used as a part of it, something that we learned they could not do in X and Y, and we learned through the events of Legends ZA. And if Team Flare had captured Mewtwo, especially if they could Mega Evolve it, then they would have more energy than they would know what to do with. They would effectively be unstoppable by their own assumed calculations. Unfortunately for them, manga Mewtwo isn't so easily kept, and even when they succeed in the ZA timeline, Mewtwo just slept. Yeah, Mewtwo effectively refused to exit slumber, refused to react to what Team Flare was doing to him, and refused to Mega Evolve even though they had the Mega Stones. So they just shut it away for over 5 years deep within the lab after Lysander Cafe and the underground lab fell to ruin. Though Mabel makes a very clear remark that she doesn't understand why Mewtwo awakened for us and how we got the Mega Stones to begin with. Questions that still have not been clearly answered since the end of the ZA DLC coming out. But what I think is that this is a key detail that could be confirming to us that Mewtwo wanted us to meet it, especially as it was able to create more Mega Stones potentially after Anj fired at the end of ZA's story. After all, Anj is the ultimate weapon in that capacity, shooting out all of this Mega energy, and Mewtwo has shown incredible psychic power that lets it teleport across the world, communicate to anyone telepathically, and so much more. I'm just saying, if the cotton candy My Little Pony unicorn that is Galarian Ponyta can do these things, Mewtwo has to be able to do it also. Not really a bold assumption, knowing that in its Mega Y form, it can do things like, I don't know, crush an entire skyscraper with a single effortless thought, which is kind of haunting when we think about it. 100 feet of construction just gone in the blink of an eye. But hey, at least he's on our side, and with the understanding of how Mewtwo doesn't need to fight for its place in the world, I think we'll never really have to worry about it besides the universe in which Giovanni won. But I think at that story's end, we will, as we see with all other stories, see Mewtwo faced with its foil one last time, Mew, and changed for the betterment of itself and those around it. Mewtwo's purpose is a strange one, and way more existential and complicated than I had ever understood when I was younger. Mewtwo is born into this world as a creature whose purpose is predetermined by those who govern over him, which are the scientists who created him. They defied nature to create him, and when he felt emotion and a connection, when he was learning his own purpose, it was first ripped away. When Mewtwo finally wakes back up, he tries to prove that his existence is worth something as a quote-unquote adult, that he deserves to exist just as much as any other Pokemon or person does. And the only way to prove this is in the only way he's been taught or to know, which is to fight. But even with this violence, even with extreme power, he's still opposed by Mew, who he was born from in some capacity, his own parents being the ancestor of all Pokemon and humanity itself. And in the end, Mewtwo, the son of man and Pokemon, finds that the circumstances of one's birth are irrelevant. It is what you do with the gift of life that determines who you are. And I don't know about you, but on a personal note, I am driven by my own desire to fulfill my own purpose in life. That life is otherwise a void that I will learn to fill. That even though all will cease to exist one day and it might seem meaningless, I will continue to smile, to be kind, to learn from others, and teach people in turn, to make genuine connections despite differences. And it's through this that I find my purpose and my own meaning, and that I will find these without trying to prove that I deserve to exist, just as Mewtwo has learned, even if it means I'm sitting on the couch with my dogs, my cats, and my fiance, just simply existing. And if you're on the road to finding this purpose for yourself, I wish you the best. I realize these days I have a tendency to go much more emotionally deep in these videos and reach into the philosophical and beauty of existence, but I think there's enough anger, hatred, and overall negativity already out there, especially on the internet. Sometimes I gotta rant against generative AI. Sometimes I just want to talk about finding beauty in life, and somebody has to, after all. With that though, we've thoroughly explored Mewtwo and a good chunk of Mew. Again, if you want more on Mew and the Tree of Life, which wasn't included, check out my video on how all the legendary Pokemon affect the ecosystem. Otherwise, I want to thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I really hope that the beginning of this wasn't too discombobulating, that it was making sense early on, and that it snowballed into something that was far more substantial. I also love reading your comments and what you have to say. It also helps boost the reach of a video, so that's always a nice thing to do. And make sure you subscribe for weekly content if you're new here, and if you'd like to go the extra mile, become a member of the channel for as little as $3 a month, which helps the channel immensely and secures free content for everyone. Plus then you get sneak peeks, behind the scenes information, and more alongside your name in the credits of every video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. Don't do anything I would do. Please be nice to each other. I love you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!